House Republicans today continued their annual conference in West Virginia. Party unity is a central theme, but foreign policy took today's conferences by storm. Now, our Washington correspondent, Luis Martinez, is at the Greenbrier Resort with more details. Luis, what can you tell us about the second day of the GOP retreat there?
Good afternoon, Jack. Yes, as you just mentioned, second day of the GOP retreat, their annual policy retreat here at the Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia. So today began at 9 a.m. with Speaker Mike Johnson holding a press conference with the rest of the Republican House leadership. And Speaker Mike Johnson made calls for unity to strategize the way forward for conservative policy making. It was very interesting to see Speaker Mike Johnson have an analogy, a football analogy. He said that Republicans shouldn't be expecting Hail Mary passes to score touchdowns. Instead, they should be trying to advance 3 yards at a time. We also spoke with Lisa McClain, the Congresswoman Secretary of the House Republican Conference, and she explained the reasoning behind Speaker Johnson's strategy. Let's listen to what Congresswoman Lisa McClain had to say.
Today, actually, we'll have a one-seat majority. So we are the last bastion of hope. We are the defense right now for reckless spending. We need to be fiscally irresponsible. We need to take care of crime.
So, Jack, the day began with calls for unity, but as you mentioned, foreign policy issues took the day by storm. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer made comments about Israel's government in D.C. in the Senate floor. Let's listen what he had to say and why Republicans had to reply so strongly to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's comments on Israel's government.
Fourth major obstacle to peace is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has all too frequently bowed to the demands of extremists. And I believe that holding a new election once the war starts to wind down, would give Israelis an opportunity to express their vision.
So, Jack, we also spoke with Congressman Van Orden, who's a former Navy SEAL, and of course, with his military experience around the world, and obviously as a congressman had very strong words to say in response to Chuck Schumer's, Senate Majority Leader, comments on the government of Israel. Let's listen to what Congressman Van Orden said about this.
It is a grossly irresponsible thing to do for the leader of the Senate to call for regime change in our closest and strongest ally in the Middle East. I cannot believe that Chuck Schumer would be doing this now. And here's something else you have to understand. Chuck Schumer would not have said this in a vacuum.
So, Jack, I think it was very interesting, the last part of Congressman Van Orden's comments, that the congressman thinks that there is more at play than just Senator Chuck Schumer's comments. We also spoke with Congressman Keith Self from Texas, who happens to be in the Committee of Foreign Affairs, and he went a step further in calling Senator Chuck Schumer's comments election interference. Let's hear what he had to say.
That's not Chuck Schumer's job. Our job, that's election interference. Now, they've gotten away with election interference in the United States, so maybe he thinks he can get away with election interference in international affairs.
So somehow, Jack, the day ended, the second day of the GOP policy retreat, with congressional Republican unity. The unity was based on the strong condemnation against Senator Chuck Schumer's comments on the government of Israel, and unity behind support for Israel in its war against Hamas. Back to you, Jack.
Luis, thank you very much for that report. Now, Israel's war to eradicate Hamas, TikTok's algorithms, and RFK Jr.'s potential VP pick. How could these factors influence the November election? Well, joining us now to give us his assessment is Mike Leon, the Director of Policy and Strategy for the Free and Equal Elections Foundation and host of the Can We Please Talk podcast. He's also an NTD News contributor. Mike Leon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Jack, thanks for having me.
Now, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this. Today, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is calling for a two-state solution in Israel. He said once the war starts winding down, Israel should hold elections and keep in mind the possibility of a Palestinian state. Now, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, this is one of the issues that's going to be on the ballot in November for Democrats. We've seen examples of it already with the uncommitted vote that's coming in during the primaries right now. We saw it play out in Michigan. I mentioned this the other day on another NTD show that the uncommitted vote has 20 delegates right now. It's not even a real person. And there's a reason behind it. It's because of what is happening with the war. It's because of Bibi Netanyahu's government right now and some of the different issues and stances that they have taken against the U.S. government for all intent and purpose. And remember, a lot of the funding for the weapons right now that Israel is using to defend itself, which it has a right to, and Hamas, let's not forget, attacked them on October 7th. But right now, the proportional response that they have right now, what's being carried out in Gaza and the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding in front of us, it's really alarming. And people on the ground, people that have covered it, people that have formerly worked at the State Department that I've talked to are all, in some way, shape, or form condemning this. This is the first time I've seen a politician on either side of the aisle actually call for Israel to hold elections. And now, if you remember, Jack, back in the summer, a lot of Israelis went to the streets protesting the Supreme Court decisions over there in Israel and protesting Bibi Netanyahu's government. I think Chuck Schumer is capitalizing on that. And also, don't forget, he is Jewish American.
Yeah, that's right. So how is this likely to impact the presidential election here? Do you think it's going to have any effect?
Whoever can solve the fact of getting these hostages back, and safely to their families, and then also figuring out a way for peace and tranquility in the region stabilized where Hamas is maybe not a factor. And that's the issue, because Israel, what they're carrying out right now, their mission that they're carrying out of eradicating Hamas, is incredibly challenging to do. I've talked to military analysts, folks that have been in the U.S. military side. It's incredibly hard to do, even though Hamas is a small terrorist organization. So that's a challenge. But I think President Biden's trying to capitalize on it with the hostage negotiation. He's in the leadership position right now as President of the United States. He's trying to make that known. Donald Trump has always supported Israel. So I would see a lot of folks that are Israeli American voters here, Jewish American, potentially support former President Trump, because he has mentioned how much he supports the Jewish people.
Yeah, a lot to look forward to in this election. And I want to switch gears here. Today, former Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said that he's putting together an investor group to buy TikTok. Now, the House just voted to force the app to divest from its China-based parent company ByteDance or be banned in the U.S. Mnuchin says he wants the bill to clear the Senate, and President Biden has promised he'll sign it. Now, how would a sale or ban of the app influence social media in this election year?
I think what you're seeing is the bipartisan nature of everyone wanting to work together to not necessarily ban it. It's more of the data collection and where that's being stored and where that's being housed and who has access to it. And I think we all agree on that it shouldn't be influenced by any foreign agents. And you could see it easily influencing an election with the way the algorithm feeds people content, whether it be information or disinformation.
Now, one opponent of the bill is presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, in this election, RFK said he'll announce his VP pick on March 26th. In his short list, he includes New York Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers and former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura. Other than the name recognition here, what else could they bring to Kennedy's ticket?
And if you're RFK Jr., if I could give you one message, sir, if you're watching this, do not pick Aaron Rodgers as your running mate. You want this to be serious. Now, Jesse Ventura actually was the governor of Minnesota. He knows how to beat the Republican and Democratic institutions, as he did with the Reform Party back in Minnesota. He was able to pass some legislation around transportation items. He made some bill cuts in Minnesota that were popular at the time when he was governor. He didn't even seek re-election, which I think he probably would have won as a second term in governor office. So he's more of a person that knows how to beat the typical DNC and RNC politics. Now, could he do it at a national level as a third-party candidate or VP to a third-party candidate? I don't know, but at least he brings the experience of trying to kind of be the middle ground between the two parties.
Mike Leon, thank you very much for your insight here.
Jack, thanks for having me.
President Biden continuing his ramped-up campaign travels following his State of the Union address. Today, he's visiting a battleground state where he may be particularly vulnerable in November. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Iris, good evening to you. What's Biden saying to Michigan voters, and what are the challenges he's facing there?
Good evening to you, Jack. So President Biden is in Michigan today as part of his swing to battleground states. And in Michigan, which he actually narrowly won in 2020 by some 150,000 votes, he's facing a new and quite substantial challenge. In the past, Democratic primary in the past month, about 100,000 voters voted uncommitted on the ballot in protest of President Biden's handling of the war in Gaza. And that's on top of another news, which is today a new poll released on Thursday shows that Biden is now trailing behind former President Trump by 5 percentage points in the battleground state of Michigan. And the latest clash between the two involves President Biden trying to seize on Trump's recent comments and accusing Trump of trying to cut Social Security. Here's what President Biden was saying in Wisconsin on Wednesday. Watch.
Just this week, Donald Trump said cuts to Social Security and Medicare are on the table. When asked if he changed his position, he said, quote, "There's a lot we can do in terms of cutting. I will never allow it to happen."
But former President Trump on Wednesday tried to clarify his earlier comments, saying he would, quote, never do anything that would jeopardize or hurt Social Security or Medicare. And Trump's campaign says his earlier comments were actually referring to cutting waste in general. Meanwhile, as President Biden wraps up his trips to swing states, including Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and today Michigan, all in the past week, Vice President Kamala Harris is in Minnesota today, traveling and visiting to an abortion clinic. She called the issue an issue that's on the ballot in November. Watch.
One of the points that must be made on this issue as we attempt to uplift the real stories and the real consequences of the Dobbs decision is to remind people elections matter. Elections matter.
Her visit today is seen as the first visit to an abortion clinic by a sitting U.S. vice president, and it comes as Democrats are trying to use the abortion issue to motivate their base in November. Back to you, Jack.
Thank you. Iris Tao reporting live from the White House. Now, former President Trump attended a court hearing in Florida today, his legal team urging a federal judge to toss the case on his handling of classified documents. Now, the attorneys have two main arguments. The first is that the statute applied to Trump was, quote, unconstitutionally vague and therefore can't be used against him. The second is that Trump had unfettered authority to decide which documents from his time in the White House he could keep as his personal records. The former president faces 40 counts in this case, including conspiracy to obstruct justice and willful retention of national defense information. He's pleaded not guilty to all of them. Judge Eileen Cannon concluded today's hearing without a ruling. She said she'll consider Trump's motions and rule on them, quote, promptly. Meanwhile, prosecutors in New York said that they would not object to a 30-day delay in Trump's criminal trial there.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.